The hangar bay of Orbital Station 7 hummed with its usual cacophony of mechanical sounds, the hiss of pressure valves, the rhythmic clang of loading equipment, and the constant drone of life support systems. Among this symphony of industrial noise, Devin Patel rolled his toolbox toward Docking Bay 12, where his newest job awaited. A damaged propulsion system on a Vicarian vessel, his supervisor had said, sliding the work order across his desk. They're paying triple our usual rate, but they're also demanding the best engineer we've got. Devin had raised an eyebrow. And that's me? Don't get cocky, Patel. They're warriors, not diplomats. Do the job, don't talk more than necessary, and for God's sake, don't stare at their skin. Now, as the massive airlock doors parted to reveal the sleek, obsidian hull of the alien ship, Devin took a deep breath. He'd worked on dozens of non-human vessels before, but Vicarians were rare visitors to this sector. Their reputation preceded them, fierce, disciplined, and intensely private. Most humans found them intimidating, which was probably why he'd been assigned this job. Devin had a knack for focusing on the mechanical problem at hand rather than the peculiarities of his clients. A narrow boarding ramp extended from the ship, and at its top stood a figure that made Devin pause despite himself. The Vicarian captain was tall, easily 7 feet, with broad shoulders and a posture that radiated authority. Her skin was a deep emerald green with subtle iridescent patterns that caught the light as she moved. But what truly captured Devin's attention was her hair, thick, crimson curls that framed sharp facial features and intense amber eyes. Engineer Patel? The captain's voice was surprisingly melodic, though her expression remained stern. I am Calvera, first commander of the Vicarian scout vessel Nanvari. Devin straightened his posture instinctively. Yes, Commander. I'm here to assess and repair your propulsion system. Follow me. Without waiting for a response, Calvera turned and strode into the ship. Devin hurriedly grabbed his toolbox and followed, suddenly aware of his shorter stature and less graceful movements compared to the alien captain. The interior of the Nanvari was as austere as its external appearance suggested, functional corridors lit with a bluish light that made the metallic surfaces gleam. They passed several other Vicarians, all with the same green skin but varying shades of hair color. Each one stiffened to attention as their captain passed. Your vessel has an interesting design, Devin commented, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. I've only seen Vicarian architecture in technical journals. Calvera didn't slow her pace. Our ships are built for efficiency and survival, not comfort or aesthetics. Sometimes those goals align more than people think, Devin replied, undeterred. The most elegant solutions often serve multiple purposes. This seemed to catch the captain's attention. She glanced back at Devin with a subtle shift in her expression, not quite a softening, but perhaps a flicker of interest. They arrived at the engine room, where the problem immediately became apparent to Devin's trained eye. The central propulsion matrix showed signs of energy discharge damage, likely from passing through an uncharted radiation belt. How long has the system been compromised? He asked, already opening his toolbox. 48 standard hours, Calvera replied, watching Devin intently as he began to examine the damaged components. We can maintain basic life support and minimal navigation, but we cannot achieve escape velocity from your system without repairs. Devin nodded, his mind already calculating the necessary procedures. I'll need to replace these conduction coils and recalibrate the energy distribution network. 6 hours, minimum. You have 4. Devin looked up, meeting the captain's unyielding gaze. Commander, rushing this kind of precision work. We have critical information that must reach the Vicarian High Command, Calvera interrupted. Every hour of delay puts lives at risk. Something in her tone made Devin believe her. This wasn't about impatience or arbitrary deadlines, there was genuine urgency behind the request. I'll do my best, Devin conceded, already rolling up his sleeves. As he began working, he became acutely aware of Calvera's presence. The captain didn't leave as expected but instead took up position near the entrance, her amber eyes fixed on Devon's every movement. It was unnerving, being watched so intently, but Devon forced himself to focus on the task at hand. This was just another job, he told himself. Albeit one performed under the unwavering gaze of the most striking alien he'd ever encountered. 3 hours into the repairs, Devon's forehead glistened with sweat as he carefully adjusted the alignment of the new conduction coils. The engine room's temperature had gradually increased as he brought various systems back online for testing, the heat combining with the pressure of Calvera's deadline to make his work conditions increasingly challenging. He'd expected the captain to leave once he'd begun the actual repairs, but she remained, sometimes watching him directly, other times reviewing data on a nearby console, but always present. The few times other crew members had entered with reports, they'd spoken in their native language, a series of musical tones and clicks that Devon's universal translator couldn't fully process. "Hand me the phase calibrator," Devon said to no one in particular, reaching out blindly as he kept his eyes on the delicate connection he was establishing. To his surprise, the tool was placed in his palm almost immediately. He glanced up to find Calvera standing closer than before, examining his work with obvious interest. "You know engineering tools," he observed, returning his attention to the repair. "I know all aspects of my ship," she replied. "I would be a poor commander if I did not." Devon nodded appreciatively. "Not all captains take that approach. I've met plenty who couldn't tell a plasma injector from a power coupling. Such commanders would not survive long among my people." There was no boasting in her tone, just a simple statement of fact. As Devon continued working, he decided to satisfy his curiosity. "Your mission must be important if you're pushing these engines so hard. Most ships wouldn't have attempted passage through that radiation belt." Calvera was silent long enough that Devon thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, almost contemplative. "We were mapping the outer territories when we detected signs of Morax activity." Devon's hands stilled momentarily. The Morax were notorious throughout the known galaxy, not quite pirates, not quite an empire, but a predatory faction that consumed resources and left devastation in their wake. "I thought the Morax were contained in the Cygnus sector after the last conflict." "As did we all," Calvera said grimly. "If they have found a way to bypass the containment barriers, many worlds, including your Earth colonies in this region, would be vulnerable." Devon resumed his work with renewed focus, suddenly understanding the urgency behind her deadline. "That explains the rush." "Yes. And why we could not request assistance through official channels. If the information proves correct, we must act swiftly. If incorrect, you don't want to cause a panic," Devon finished for her. "Smart." A small noise from Calvera, something between a hum and a click, caught his attention. When he glanced up, her expression seemed marginally softer than before. "You understand tactical thinking, Engineer Patel." "Devon," he corrected automatically. "And I grew up in a military family. Some things stick with you." He disconnected a damaged circuit board and held it up to the light. "This is completely fried. Do you have replacement parts on board? Follow me." Calvera led him through a series of corridors to a storage area where spare components were meticulously organized. As she accessed the inventory system, Devon took the opportunity to observe her more closely. Despite her warrior demeanor, there was a grace to her movements, efficient and precise, nothing wasted. Her crimson hair was pulled back from her face now, revealing more of her features, including what appeared to be ritual markings along her jawline. "These should match your specifications," she said, retrieving a container of components. As she handed it to him, their fingers briefly touched. Devon noticed an immediate reaction. Her skin seemed to shimmer slightly at the contact, the iridescent patterns temporarily brightening. "Your species." He began, then hesitated, remembering his supervisor's warning about staring. Yes? There was a hint of challenge in her tone. Your skin reacts to touch. Is that a biological response or some kind of tech integration? To his surprise, Calvera didn't seem offended by the question. Both. My people evolved with photoreactive dermal cells. Later generations enhanced this natural ability with biomechanical interfaces that help us process environmental information. Fascinating, Devon said, genuinely impressed. That must be incredibly useful for a species that travels through space. It served us well during our evolutionary rise and serves us differently now. She gestured toward the components in his hands. We should return to the engine room. As they walked back, Devon noticed subtle differences in how the other crew members regarded him now. The initial wariness seemed tempered with curiosity, perhaps even a grudging respect. Had Calvera communicated something about him to her crew, or was it simply that he'd survived several hours under her intense supervision? Back at the engine room, Devon resumed work with renewed determination. The conversation had provided valuable insight into not just the mission's urgency but also Calvera herself. She wasn't merely the intimidating warrior he'd initially perceived but a commander bearing the weight of information that could affect countless lives. The primary systems should be back online in about 40 minutes, he informed her as he installed the replacement components. After that, I'll need to run a full diagnostic to ensure the calibration holds under stress testing. That would exceed your 4-hour limit, Calvera noted, though without the hard edge her voice had carried earlier. Devon glanced at her. I can get you mobile within 4 hours as promised. But if you want this repair to hold all the way to your homeworld, you'll give me the extra 30 minutes for testing. A tense silence followed his statement. He'd essentially challenged her authority on her own ship, something he suspected few dared to do. The other engineers present in the room had gone completely still, clearly anticipating their captain's response. Finally, Calvera made that strange humming clicking sound again. Your honesty is refreshing, Devon Patel. You will have your additional time. Relief washed over him, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Thank you, Commander. You won't regret it. As he turned back to his work, he caught one of the other Vicarians staring at him with what seemed to be astonishment. Clearly, he'd just witnessed something rare, perhaps Calvera didn't often change her mind once it was set. The next hour passed in focused silence as Devon completed the most critical repairs. He became so absorbed in his work that he almost forgot about Calvera's presence until he sensed her standing directly behind him, close enough that he could feel the subtle heat radiating from her form. Your technique is unlike our engineers, she observed. Less methodical, more intuitive. Human engineering tends to value creative problem-solving, Devon replied without looking up. We improvise. Yet your results are effective. Was that approval in her voice? Devon couldn't be sure, but something about the comment made him smile slightly as he continued working against the clock, increasingly aware of the alien captain's scrutiny and the strange tension building between them. Propulsion systems restored to 97% efficiency, Devon announced, closing the access panel with a satisfied click. The remaining 3% is within acceptable parameters and should resolve itself once the new components fully integrate with your systems. He wiped his hands on a cloth and checked the time display on his wrist unit. 4 hours and 26 minutes, slightly over Calvera's original deadline, but well within the extended timeframe she'd granted him. The diagnostic tests had confirmed what he already knew, his repairs would hold. Calvera approached the main engineering console, her amber eyes scanning the readouts. The other Vicarian engineers exchanged glances before one of them spoke in their native language. Calvera responded with a short series of musical tones, and immediately the crew began filing out of the engine room, leaving Devon alone with the captain. Your crew seems pleased, Devon observed, beginning to pack his tools. The ship should be ready for departure within the hour. I just need to file my completion report with Orbital Station Control, and you'll be cleared to. Your work exceeds expectations, Devin Patel, Calvera interrupted, turning to face him fully. Her voice carried a new note, something warmer than her previous professional tone. You have restored the Ninvari when time was most critical. Devin smiled, shouldering his toolbox. Just doing my job, Commander. Though I appreciate the challenge. Vicarian technology is remarkably elegant once you understand the underlying principles. You have done more than repair machinery, she continued, moving closer to him with a deliberate stride that made Devin suddenly aware of their solitude. You have saved this vessel, its mission, and potentially many lives. Well, when you put it that way. Devin chuckled nervously, finding himself backing up slightly until he felt the edge of a console behind him. Something about Calvera's intensity had shifted, and he wasn't quite sure how to read it. I'm glad I could help. In Vicarian culture, such a debt cannot be left unacknowledged, Calvera said, now standing directly before him, close enough that he had to tilt his head up to maintain eye contact. The savior of a vessel must be properly honored according to ancient traditions. That's really not necessary, Devin replied, though curiosity sparked within him. The payment arranged with the station is more than. His words died in his throat as Calvera reached forward and grasped the front of his work jacket. For a wild moment, he thought she might be attacking him, had he somehow offended her, but instead, her long green fingers began methodically unfastening the clasps. Commander? Devin stammered, his heart suddenly pounding. What are you? The ritual of Vectar requires the removal of external contaminants, she explained matter-of-factly, continuing to work on his jacket. Your garments have absorbed energetic residue from our systems. They must be removed and purified. Devin's mind raced. Was this some kind of bizarre alien custom, or had he severely misinterpreted the situation? He gently caught her wrists, halting her progress. I think there might be a cultural misunderstanding happening here, he said carefully. In human customs, removing someone's clothes is generally considered, intimate. Calvera's iridescent skin patterns pulsed subtly. The Vectar is indeed an intimate tradition. It recognizes the profound connection formed when one being ensures the continued existence of another. Oh, Devin managed, his mouth suddenly dry. That kind of intimate. You object? There was genuine curiosity in her voice, but also something that sounded almost like disappointment. Devin found himself at a crossroads. The professional part of his brain screamed that this was inappropriate and potentially hazardous to diplomatic relations. Yet another part, the part that had been increasingly fascinated by this enigmatic alien commander, was undeniably intrigued. I don't object, exactly, he said slowly. But I'm not sure I fully understand what this ritual entails. Calvera's expression softened fractionally. Understanding is not required for participation, but it is preferred. The Vectar is an energy exchange, a harmonization between savior and saved. It is both spiritual and physical in nature. As she spoke, her skin began to glow more prominently, the patterns shifting in hypnotic waves. Devin found himself transfixed by the display, his earlier apprehension giving way to a mixture of scientific curiosity and something more primal. Is it dangerous? He asked, realizing he still held her wrists and slowly releasing them. Not to you, she assured him. Though for many non-Vicarians, the experience can be intense. The way she emphasized that last word sent an unexpected shiver down Devin's spine. He had come to this ship expecting a routine repair job, not an alien ritual that apparently involved getting undressed with the captain. And yet, if I were to agree to this Vectar, he said carefully, it would be considered an appropriate cultural response? Not a violation of protocol or... It would be considered an honor, Calvera replied. One rarely extended to outsiders. Devin took a deep breath, making his decision. Then I accept, Commander. Something like satisfaction flickered across Calvera's features. She resumed unfastening his jacket, and this time Devon did not stop her. As the garment fell open, revealing the simple t-shirt he wore underneath, she spoke again. For the duration of the Vectar, I am not your commander, nor are you an engineer. We are simply Calvera and Devon, joined by the thread of survival. As his jacket slipped from his shoulders, Devon realized he was embarking on something far beyond his usual experience, a cultural exchange more profound than any technical knowledge he'd gained from working on alien vessels. Whatever happened next would certainly redefine his understanding of routine repairs. The captain's quarters reflected Calvera's personality, Spartan and functional, yet with subtle elements that hinted at deeper complexities. Various artifacts adorned the walls, items Devon assumed held cultural or personal significance. A large viewport dominated one wall, offering a spectacular view of the orbital station and the curve of the planet beyond. Devon stood in the center of the room, still processing how quickly events had escalated from completing repairs to being escorted here for an alien ritual he barely understood. Calvera moved around the space with practiced efficiency, adjusting environmental controls and activating what appeared to be some kind of ceremonial lighting sequence. The Vectar is rarely performed outside Vicarian space, she explained, her voice taking on a more formal cadence. You honor me by your willingness to participate. I'm still not entirely sure what I'm participating in, Devon admitted, watching as the room's lighting shifted to a deep blue hue that made Calvera's green skin appear almost luminescent. She approached him again, her movements more deliberate than before. The ritual has 3 phases: cleansing, synchronization, and confluence. We begin with cleansing. Before Devon could ask for clarification, Calvera raised her hands to her own collar and began unfastening her uniform. The gesture was neither hurried nor overtly seductive, it carried the ceremonial weight of someone performing a sacred act. Nevertheless, Devon felt his heartbeat quicken as the alien captain methodically removed her outer garments. Is this standard procedure when someone fixes your ship? He asked, aiming for levity but hearing the nervousness in his own voice. A sound emerged from Calvera that took Devon a moment to recognize as laughter, musical and restrained, but genuine. No, Devon Patel. The Vectar is reserved for true salvation. Had you merely replaced a faulty component, we would have simply offered payment. Her amber eyes met his. But you saved my ship when time was critical, understanding the stakes without being told. Such actions merit more significant acknowledgement. As her upper uniform fell away, Devon was transfixed by the patterns that flowed across her exposed skin, intricate designs that pulsed with a subtle internal light, following the contours of her muscular form. They weren't random, he realized, but seemed to map to something like circulatory or nervous systems, creating living artwork that constantly shifted and changed. Your turn, she said simply, gesturing to his remaining clothes. Taking a deep breath, Devon pulled his t-shirt over his head. The air in the room was warm against his skin, carrying a subtle scent he couldn't identify, something like ozone and exotic spices. The cleansing removes energetic interference, Calvera explained, continuing to disrobe as she spoke. Our physical forms carry imprints of our experiences, technologies, and environments. These must be harmonized before true connection can occur. As they both finished removing their clothes, Devon fought the instinct to cover himself, reminding himself that human concepts of modesty likely held little meaning in this context. Still, he couldn't help feeling vulnerable, not just physically exposed, but culturally adrift, with only Calvera as his guide. The captain seemed to sense his uncertainty. Are you uncomfortable, Devon? Not uncomfortable, exactly, he replied, striving for honesty. Just navigating unfamiliar territory. Calvera approached him, the bioluminescent patterns across her body intensifying as she drew near. Navigation is a skill we both possess, though in different domains. Allow me to guide you through this one. She raised her hands, palms facing him, stopping just short of touching his chest. The second phase, synchronization, begins with energy alignment. May I? Devon nodded, and Calvera placed her palms against his skin. The contact sent an immediate sensation through him, not quite electrical, but a distinct tingling that spread from the points of contact throughout his body. Her skin was warmer than he'd expected, with a texture like smooth velvet. Your energy patterns are chaotic, she observed, her brow furrowing slightly. Is this typical of humans? I wouldn't know, Devon replied, finding it increasingly difficult to maintain his clinical detachment as her hands began to move slowly across his chest, shoulders, and arms. We don't typically perceive energy patterns. A limitation, she murmured. And yet, not a weakness. Your species compensates with other strengths. As her hands continued their exploratory path, Devon found himself responding to her touch in ways that transcended the merely physical. Each contact point seemed to create a resonance between them, as if the ritual was indeed synchronizing something fundamental within their disparate biologies. The patterns on your skin, he said, voice slightly hoarse, they're responding to me, aren't they? Yes, Calvera acknowledged. They reflect the harmonization process. Your energy signature is being mapped and accommodated. Following an impulse he didn't fully understand, Devon slowly raised his own hands. May I? Her amber eyes widened slightly, surprise, perhaps, or approval. You wish to reciprocate. This is unusual for non-Vicarians. But yes, you may. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, immediately feeling that same resonant tingling. The luminescent patterns beneath his fingers pulsed and swirled, creating new configurations that flowed outward from his touch. It was mesmerizing, like watching living artwork respond to his presence. Remarkable, he breathed, moving his hands carefully along the contours of her arms. It's like your body is having a conversation with mine. An apt description, Calvera said, her voice taking on a deeper timbre. The Vectar is indeed a conversation, one conducted without the limitations of language. As they continued this mutual exploration, Devon found the initial awkwardness fading, replaced by a growing fascination and something more profound. The ritual was creating a connection that somehow bypassed cultural differences, speaking instead to something more primal and universal. The final phase, Calvera said eventually, her voice now carrying a husky quality that sent shivers through Devon, is confluence. The merging of energetic patterns. Her hands moved to frame his face, and she leaned forward until their foreheads touched. The contact sparked an immediate intensification of the sensations. The tingling became a rush, spreading through Devon's entire body. He gasped at the overwhelming flood of feeling, instinctively wrapping his arms around Calvera to steady himself. This is... He began, but words failed him as new sensations cascaded through his nervous system, pleasure unlike anything he'd experienced, but also flashes of emotion and memory that weren't his own. He was simultaneously himself and something more, connected to Calvera in ways that transcended physical intimacy. Yes, she whispered against his skin, her entire body now glowing with intense patterns that seemed to extend beyond her physical form, reaching out to envelop him. This is the true purpose of Vectar. Not merely acknowledgement, but understanding. What followed was beyond Devon's ability to fully comprehend or later articulate, a merging of sensations and consciousness that dissolved the boundaries between them. Human and Vicarian physiology found unexpected harmonies, guided by the ancient ritual and their mutual willingness to explore the unknown. In those moments of confluence, Devon understood Calvera in ways that would have been impossible through conventional means, glimpsing fragments of her life, her responsibilities, her private doubts and unwavering dedication to her people. And somehow, he knew she was experiencing similar insights about him. The ritual built to an overwhelming crescendo of shared sensation before gradually, mercifully, beginning to subside, leaving them both trembling and clinging to each other in the blue-tinted darkness of the captain's quarters. Now, Calvera said softly against his shoulder, her voice containing a warmth he hadn't heard before, "The debt is acknowledged. The circle is complete." But as their breathing slowly returned to normal and the luminescent patterns on her skin gradually dimmed to a subtle glow, Devon sensed that something fundamental had changed between them, something that extended far beyond the completion of a cultural ritual or the repayment of a debt. Morning cycle on the Ninvari brought a subtle shift in the vessel's lighting, simulating dawn. Devon awoke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before the events of the previous night came rushing back. He turned his head to find Calvera already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, her back to him as she reviewed data on a handheld device. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin had returned to their normal subtle state, though they still pulsed gently in hypnotic sequences. Without the intensity of the ritual enhancing them, they reminded Devon of constellations, star maps etched into living tissue. "Good morning," he ventured, pushing himself up to a sitting position. Or whatever the appropriate greeting is on a Vicarian vessel. Calvera turned, her expression unreadable. "We simply acknowledge the cycle change. The new rotation begins." "The new rotation begins, then," Devon repeated, testing the phrase. An awkward silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions. After the profound connection they'd shared during the Vectar, this morning after distance felt particularly jarring. "Your repair work continues to hold," she said finally, gesturing to her device. "All systems are functioning within optimal parameters." "Good." Devon nodded, recognizing the retreat to professional territory. Perhaps it was easier for both of them. "I should probably get back to the station. My supervisor will be wondering where I disappeared to." Calvera set her device aside and fully turned to face him. "Devon Patel, I find myself in an unusual position." "How so?" "The Vectar is typically performed with the understanding that the participants will not meet again." Her amber eyes studied him intently. "It is considered complete unto itself." "I see." Devon felt a surprising pang of disappointment. "A one-time ritual to settle a debt." "Yes. But our circumstances are non-standard." Something in her tone made Devon pay closer attention. "In what way?" "The connection formed during true Vectar leaves traces, neural pathways that remain partially aligned even after physical separation." She gestured between them. "You felt it, did you not? The sharing of memories, emotions, perspectives?" Devon nodded slowly. "I experienced fragments. Glimpses of your life. Your responsibilities. The weight you carry as commander. As I experienced yours," she confirmed. "Your family history. Your passion for solving mechanical puzzles. Your solitude despite working among many." Hearing his own private realities articulated by this alien woman was startling. During the ritual, the exchange had seemed natural, almost dreamlike. Now, in the clarity of the new cycle, the implications were more profound. "What does this mean for us?" he asked directly. Calvera rose and began retrieving her uniform, her movements deliberate. "Ordinarily, nothing. The ritual is complete. Our paths would diverge." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "However, the mission that brings us to your sector is not a simple one." "The Morex activity," Devon recalled. "Yes. We must deliver our intelligence to the High Command, but it is likely we will be tasked with continuing observation in this region." "Which means?" "You'll be coming back to this station," Devon finished for her. "Precisely." She fastened her uniform, once again becoming the formidable commander he'd first encountered. "The question becomes, would additional contact be beneficial or detrimental, given what has transpired between us?" Devon couldn't help but smile slightly at her methodical approach to what humans would consider an emotional question. It was so characteristically Vicarian. "Are you asking if I want to see you again when you return?" he asked, reaching for his own clothes. The subtle pulsing of her skin patterns accelerated briefly. In essence, yes. Devon considered the question seriously. The Vectar had been unlike anything he'd ever experienced, intense, profound, and admittedly overwhelming. Under normal circumstances, he might have been content to file it away as an extraordinary one-time encounter. But the lingering connection he felt to Calvera wasn't something he could easily dismiss. "I would like that," he said finally, meeting her gaze directly. "Though I imagine we'd have to navigate some complex territory. Cultural differences. Your command responsibilities." "The complications are numerous," she agreed, though Devon detected a note of relief in her voice. "Interspecies connections are rare among my people, particularly for those in command positions." "Are they forbidden?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "Not forbidden. Merely uncommon and politically complex." She approached him as he finished dressing. "But I have never allowed political complexities to dictate my personal choices." That statement revealed more about her character than perhaps she realized, and Devon found himself smiling again. "Commander Calvera, are you suggesting we explore where this connection might lead?" The formal title seemed to remind her of their respective positions, and she straightened slightly. "I am suggesting that when duty brings the Ninvari back to this sector, I would seek your expertise again. Both professionally and otherwise." It wasn't the most romantic proposition Devon had ever received, but considering the source, it was remarkably direct. "I'd be happy to provide my services in both capacities." A trace of what might have been amusement flickered across her features. "Your species has a talent for understatement." "And yours for protocol," he countered. "But I think we've proven that interesting things can happen when those tendencies intersect." Calvera extended her hand in what Devon recognized as an adoption of the human handshake gesture, a deliberate cultural accommodation. But when he took her hand, she turned his palm upward and pressed her own against it, skin to skin. The immediate tingle of connection sparked between them, a muted echo of the previous night's intensity. "Until our paths cross again, Devon Patel," she said, the formal words belied by the warmth in her eyes and the responsive patterns flowing across her skin where they touched. "I'll keep your ship's configuration in my database," he replied, deliberately casual despite the racing of his heart. "For efficiency's sake." "Most efficient," she agreed, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Later, as Devon crossed the docking tube back to Orbital Station 7, he marveled at the unexpected turn his routine repair assignment had taken. His supervisor would demand an explanation for his overnight absence, and he'd have to fabricate something plausible, the truth being far too extraordinary to share. Behind him, the sleek Vicarian vessel prepared for departure, its newly repaired propulsion system humming with perfect efficiency. Soon it would break orbit, carrying Calvera and her crew, and their critical intelligence about the Morax, back to their homeworld. But as Devon watched the ship's departure from the station's observation deck, he found himself already calculating how long such a journey would take, how much time the Vicarian High Command might need to process the information and formulate a response, and when, realistically, he might expect the Ninvari to return to this sector. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to something more compelling than the next technical challenge. Whatever lay ahead between him and the green-skinned captain with the crimson hair would certainly be more complex than any engine repair, and potentially far more rewarding. As the Vicarian ship vanished into a burst of light, engaging its faster-than-light drive, Devon smiled to himself. Some repair jobs, it seemed, came with unexpected benefits. And this one had opened up possibilities he'd never imagined, new horizons beyond the mechanical problems he'd built his life around solving. The next time the Ninvari docked at Orbital Station 7, he would be ready. Both professionally and otherwise.